It's certainly good to see all of you tonight. Happy for the presence of each one, especially those of you that are visiting with us. We're happy that you've come out to be with us tonight. In this evening's lesson, I have another lesson from the book of Proverbs, and want to look at the family in the book of Proverbs, and have about, Lord willing, maybe 3 lessons dealing with what the book of Proverbs has to say about the family. First, want to look at some proverbs on husbands and wives. And in the past, I've ended this sermon with the section dealing with the most excellent woman that's found in Proverbs 31, but I think I'll try to make a separate lesson on that instead of trying to cram it in at the end of this lesson. And then we'll look at parents and children and the raising of children and what the book of Proverbs says about that. In looking at husbands and wives, I want to begin by looking at the personal bond that the book of Proverbs talks about, that husband and wife ought to have with one another. Clearly, it shows the idea of polygamy is certainly something that was widespread, but it's not in this book of wisdom. It doesn't talk about polygamy. It talks about God's original pattern for marriage between a husband and a wife. It's something that a man like Solomon, who had 700 wives and 300 concubines, and that's the lifestyle that he ended up choosing, being a great and powerful king, that what he talks about in this book of wisdom and inspiration deals with husband and wife, just one husband and one wife together, the original pattern that there should be in marriage. And of course, the most blessed state that we can live in as far as marriage is concerned is this original pattern that God has given to us and that God intended from the beginning. We're told that they should share in the training of their children and speak with one voice, that they ought to be a united partnership in the rearing of children. A lot of times, we see something different in homes where maybe the mother is responsible for education and the father's responsible for discipline. But when you look at the passages here, they are united in their efforts to teach and in all of those different areas, whether it's discipline or education. They're both working together to do both. It says in chapter 1 and verses 8 and 9, "Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. Indeed, they are a grateful wreath to your head and ornaments about your neck." So notice that as you look at the parallelism there in this Hebrew poetry, that both father and mother, their instructions are one and the same. They're equally passing on teaching to the children, both instruction and teaching, and they're both engaged in this work to benefit the child. So we work together as a team, and of course ought to be on the same page with one another and enforcing the same standard that we're living by to help our children. And the children are told that it is something that will be a great blessing to them if they'll pay heed to their parents. Their parents, above all, are interested in their children's welfare and them having a good life and to be prosperous and happy and faithful. And I guess young people have a great desire for adornments and nice clothes to wear or jewelry to wear and so on. But it says the greatest wreath that you could put on your head, the best thing that you could wear is a crown, is that you take to heart the teaching that godly parents give to you. And in the future, they're going to bring you victory in life and honor in life as you fight the spiritual battles that we all have to go through in life. It'll be a wreath to your head and an ornament about your neck. It'll be something that certainly will be a sign of your dignity and your beautiful inner person if you'll listen to the wise teaching that godly parents pass on. You think in the New Testament about the adorning that women ought to have. And Peter says that the emphasis should not be on the outside, the putting on of dresses and so on, but it said, let it be the hidden person of the heart that you put the emphasis on beautifying, because that meek and quiet spirit is precious in the sight of God. So with these children, the greatest adornment they can have is to take to heart the teaching they receive and build a good character. And it'll be like a crown and like an ornament that they can wear around their neck. A similar proverb in chapter 6, put together husband and wife or father and mother, again, in talking about them speaking to their children with a common voice of wisdom, in sharing God's teaching and their experience. My son, observe the commandment of your father, and do not forsake the teaching of your mother. Bind them continually on your heart, tie them around your neck, and when you walk about, they will guide you. When you sleep, they will watch over you, and you awake, they will talk to you. So again, when we are working together to try to instruct our children, we need to be a united team that are working together to help them to respect God and to respect their fellow man, and to be good citizens and good productive people that look out for the good of others and not just themselves, that stay clear of those things that are involved with immorality and lack of self-control. And if a child will listen to these things again, if they'll bind them on their heart so that they'll never forget them, if they'll take the teaching that comes from godly parents and tie them around their neck, so not only they're with them at all times, but other people can see by their behavior the teaching of their parents, then they'll be able to walk about and have a guide in life, that they'll always have that voice in their head to help them make the right decision when moral choices. And when a person has to decide what they're going to engage in, it'll be some protection for you when you fall asleep. And it'll watch over you to have this truth that you've put in your heart. And when you awake, it's going to be there as a voice to talk to you and give you the counsel that you need later on in life. So important what we teach our children. All of us have those voices in our head of the things that we were taught by our parents. And what a great blessing it is if your parents are unified and they're teaching God's word to you, not just their personal opinions, but they're really passing on to you this great teaching. So shows the unity that there is with husband and wife. And we're urged in the book of Proverbs to be devoted to one another. More than just devoted to each other, have a passion for one another. Have an ardent love for one another in the home. Put all of the passion into your marriage, and don't be involved in immorality or get involved in adultery, but recognize God's blessed you with a wife or a husband that can bring you satisfaction in your life, and consider that to be your greatest joy and blessing and source of gratification. Says, let your fountain be blessed. This fountain, this source of joy. And rejoice in the wife of your youth, as a loving hind and a graceful doe. Two delicate, beautiful animals is the way many times in the Old Testament a young woman is described in her delicate beauty that she has. And let her breast satisfy you at all times. Be exhilarated always with her love. Idea of just affection and desire. Pour that into your marriage and into your mate, and you'll be able to find gratification and fulfillment, and you can be exhilarated always with her love. You've got to invest in your mate 24 hours a day in order to be able to get this satisfaction that God intends for there to be there in marriage. And it says you'll be cheered, you'll be elated if you do so. For why should you, my son, be exhilarated with an adulteress and embrace the bosom of a foreigner? So we're to put a total commitment and put all of our heart into our relationship in our homes, and we can enjoy these good and righteous pleasures. We're told in the New Testament, let the marriage bed be undefiled, and recognize that adulterers and fornicators, is going to judge. So the marriage bed is something that is sacred and holy, and the things that go on there are right in God's sight. A broken marriage vow is a sin against an old comrade, we're told. It talks about how shameful it is for a wife, and also the same would be true for a husband, to violate their covenant that they've made before God with their mate when they get married. And we need to heed these words of wisdom and recognize just how damaging it is to our life and how wrong it is to sin against the companion of our youth. It says in speaking of the adulterous woman in 2:17, that leaves the companion of her youth and forgets the covenant of her God. When we get married, we stand before God and witnesses, and we make a commitment to live according to God's laws of marriage, and God witnesses those words that we say and holds us accountable to stay faithful to them, and He binds us together. And just how wrong it is then to commit adultery. We're told that it is the companion of your youth, is the way the New American Standard translates it there. It's the same word for intimate friend in these other proverbs. A perverse man stirs up or spreads strife, and a slanderer separates intimate friends. He who covers a transgression seeks love, but he who repeats a matter separates intimate friends. 5:13, but it is you, a man my equal, my companion, and my familiar friend. Who is to be your best friend, your closest companion, the one that you share everything with, according to the book of Proverbs? It's your mate. Husband and wife are to be the closest of friends, the closest confidants that can share any secret information with and know that that's going to be protected, that you're able to be in a relationship where, like an intimate friend that you have a great like for, we ought to learn to love and be affectionate and like one another and like doing things together and be able to put our trust in one another. And how sad it is for the person that should be most trusted, that should be most loyal, then to forsake you and to not be faithful. It shows what a horrible sin and what a treachery adultery is, that someone would violate those wedding vows and turn against the one that they'd committed their life to. The great value of a good wife is emphasized in the book of Proverbs, and just how good it is to find a companion that you can depend upon, that lives with wisdom. And hopefully by reading these Proverbs, we'll all think about how blessed we are to have a godly mate and somebody that is serious-minded and that's looking out for the family's best interest. And it will not neglect to praise one with such value to us, whether it's your husband or your wife, and the good that they do. We all need and like to be appreciated. The wife is going to be the making or unmaking of her husband. And of course, maybe even to a greater degree, the opposite would be true also about how a woman's life is going to go. If she marries somebody that has a good character and is a good worker and is wise, I mean, her life is going to be certainly better. And if he is a louse and lazy and abusive, then her life's going to be miserable. So it is so important that we choose wisely on who we marry and that we invest in that person and try to help them to be, the very best they can be and encourage all of the best behavior in one another. In chapter 18 and verse 22, he who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. You find something, he says, that is an especially good blessing. You find prosperity, it could be translated. You find happiness. You find the keys and secret of life here under the sun, to a big extent, is who you marry and what type of character that person has. And you obtain favor from the Lord if you are so blessed that you've been able to obtain for yourself a faithful mate that has a good head on their shoulders and is wise, you have received a special grace from the Lord. You ought to always be thankful for such a mate. It says, houses and wealth are an inheritance from fathers, but a prudent wife is from the Lord. They're great gifts that you might receive if you have wealthy parents or wise parents that have been able to make a success in life materially, that they can pass on some advantages to you in this life. But nothing in comparison to the gift that God can give us, and that is a woman that's been trained by His Word, one that is blessed with a good mind of prudence. That is an special gift that the Lord can give you. We ought to pray that we can find such a person. We ought to be thankful if we have such a person that is prudent. When you think of the word prudent, it means wise in handling practical matters in a general sense. It means circumspect or cautious, someone that's careful and acting with or showing care and thought about the future. Somebody that's not the very opposite of that, which is careless, unthinking, doesn't think about what's going to happen tomorrow if I do this or that. Somebody that's carefully walking and making sure that they avoid the dangers and pitfalls that'll ruin the future for herself and her husband and her family. She's a prudent woman that looks carefully at where she steps and how she behaves and what actions that she takes. And all of us ought to strive to be that prudent wife. You know, another way in which application could be made of all of these proverbs in the relationship of husband and wife is for us also to think about the type of wife that the church is to be towards Jesus Christ. We want to be a blessing to our Master and Lord. We want to be able to advance His interest in the gospel and in the church and in trying to save other people. And we need to be prudent and think about each step that we take in the choices that we make in life. And we're thinking about the future when we do something. How is this going to affect our Master and Lord? How is it going to have an impact upon His family? And so a prudent wife is especially a blessing from the Lord. I know the opposite is also true. It tells us just how rotten it can be for one who doesn't have a blessing in the choice of their mate, doesn't have good character in their mate. So it can be an excellent thing or it can be a curse under the sun, according to which way a person chooses and how a person develops their character that you're married to. It says that an excellent wife is the crown of her husband, but she who shames him is as rottenness in his bones. So the excellent wife, the virtuous wife, the same word to talk about that excellent woman in Proverbs 31. It basically has its most fundamental meaning, the idea of she's strong, but especially in the sense of morally and mentally, she's strong. That she chooses to do the right thing. She stands up for what is right, and she has a mind that chooses the wise and proper thing for herself and her family and her children. But she is an excellent, strong woman that makes these proper choices. This kind of woman, if you're lucky enough and blessed enough to be married to her, she is going to bring honor to your head. She'll be a crown of honor and victory for you in life. People will see that your successes, you have someone strong behind you as a helpmate that's helping you in life. But on the other hand, if she's not an excellent, strong person, if she's weak, if she's lazy, if she's mentally dull and doesn't think things through as she ought to do for the good of her husband and family and self, then there's going to be shame that's going to be involved in being married to such a person. And none of us want to be a source of shame to our mate, emotional pain, grief, and guilt because we made such a poor choice in life and have to suffer the disgrace of foolish behavior on the part of our mate. And it says it is rottenness to the bones. We think about the word rottenness means decay is the literal meaning of the word, and it's used here, of course, in a figurative sense. One sense, you think of it as being ravaged by worms in some context, and you might think about it as almost like bone cancer eating you up if you make a foolish choice or you're bound together unequally with somebody that is not living the proper kind of life. So the marriage that we make is the making of us or the ruin of us. And of course, we want to be a source of blessing to whoever we're married to and bring honor and victory and glory to them. In chapter 14 and verse 1 of Proverbs, it talks about her wisdom. On her wisdom depends the whole family's security. How many statements have there been made in history about the influence of a wife and mother on society? The hand that rocks the cradle, rules the world. Those that are raising children, they have the greatest influence on what's going to happen in the future. And if it's a wise woman that's handling that responsibility, the future for the world, for the church, it looks great. But if we're not wise, then there's going to be all kinds of disorder and problems. There's so many things that we have the power to make all the difference on how we treat our mate. The advice we're given in the New Testament is the husband is to love his wife, and the wife is to see to it that she respects her husband. And the part that you can control and how your family's going to turn out is how you invest in your family and in your mate. You can't force the other person to think the proper way or do the proper way. You have to have influence through your good behavior and in the investments that you make and the example that you make. A wise woman is going to constantly be trying to build her house up, her family up. She's going to be making those choices of a well-ordered life is the idea of wise there. It brings benefit, strength to the house because she's got her act together, and the way that she's conducting herself is going to build the family. But on the other hand, if she's a foolish woman, it says, but the foolish tears it down with their own hands. She destroys the family. She destroys her relationship with her husband because instead of being well-ordered, she's unprincipled in the way that she behaves herself. She has bad management of her duties and responsibilities in the home. She gets involved in evil doings, and it ruins the family. Materially, it's going to ruin the family. Financially, morally, that kind of influence. So we always have to think about, what are we doing? Are we building things up, or are we tearing things down? And this great responsibility is put in our hands to be a positive influence in the home. And we need to prayerfully see that we're building up and not tearing down. Something that's emphasized a great deal in the book of Proverbs are sexual sins. And they're presented in this book in the very darkest colors. We have the light of truth shined on what immorality, what adultery does, and just how serious it is to get engaged in such things. And like so many things we see in the book of Proverbs, it's completely relevant still in our day and age, that this is a great threat to the home, to marriages, and to the lives of little children, that they have immoral parents that don't respect their marriage vows, that get involved in sexual immorality. And there's great assault on the home going on right now. And of course, there are many times that Christians get caught up in these things. I've been in a number of different churches over the years, and it's sad to see these kind of things happen, even among Christians, that people will act immorally and wreck their lives and wreck their home. So it's worth taking the time to heed what God's Spirit tells us in this book, that we recognize just how dark these sins are and how foolish they are to get involved in, and make up our minds that we're going to be loyal and faithful to our marriage vows and to our mate. It's an exchange of true intimacy for a poor and weak imitation. Sexual relations in marriage is a great blessing and joy, and something that the Bible holds up as a gift of God and something that is a blessing to mankind. But when you pervert that and exchange that for sex outside of marriage, then there's going to be great harm caused. In that same proverb that we read earlier, as a loving hind and a graceful doe, talking about your wife, let her breast satisfy you at all times. Be exhilarated always with her love. For why should you, my son, be exhilarated with an adulteress and embrace the bosom of a foreigner? So as you look at these other words, just like you can be drunk and you can be exhilarated with your wife, why would you want to go out and join yourself and be drunk in love with somebody that is not connected to you and to your marriage and to your commitments you made before God? This is an adulteress. The word there in the Hebrew means a stranger. It's used for an enemy. It's used for a prostitute. Why would you exchange this, which is holy and undefiled, and get involved with somebody where you're going to be involved in immorality and an enemy to what is right and what is best for your soul? To a foreigner, the word there means an alien. It's used for a harlot and an adulteress in the Old Testament. And what a contrast between the lovely joy that you have in your marriage and then throwing that away and getting involved in immorality. It is a parting with your honor to be an adulterer or an adulteress. And we're told in chapter 5 and verse 9, says, lest you give your vigor to others and your hard-earned goods to the house of an alien. So you get involved with the immoral woman or immoral man, and you give up your life force, your vigor to that which is immoral and opposed to what is best for you. So you lose your usefulness, your ability to be profitable in the kingdom of God, and the best of your years. And that is wasted when you get involved in an immoral relationship. You waste your strength, you waste your wealth. The goods that you have in your house are going to be ruined. It's enslaving fornication and adultery. Getting involved in sexual immorality is just like being addicted to alcohol or drugs, and we know the destructive nature of those things. In the end, they wreck your life and finances and your health. He says adultery does the same thing. And there's no one wiser than Solomon to tell us about these things. No one wiser than our God that inspired him to tell us it's a way of ruin, and it will ruin your name. He says in 6:33, wounds and disgrace he will find, and his reproach will not be blotted out. If you take the way of adultery and immorality, you'll ruin your reputation. You're going to ruin your family. It's going to be a black mark in the life of your children, and it's going to hurt your health. And the affliction of every kind comes on those that are immoral. It's going to be a wounds and disgrace is what you'll gain for yourself. Every kind of dishonor and affliction. And so many times it's something you're never going to be able to turn back from. You're never going to be able to make things right again if you go down that road. And so we must make up our mind every day that's not going to be the case. We are committed to faithful devotion to our mate. It's a surrender of your liberty in the end. You get involved, like all sins, they have cords that wrap around you and entangle your life to where eventually you're a slave. You can't get out. Once you go down the road of sexual immorality and adultery, you fall into a pit that you can't get out of. We're told in Proverbs 23, verses 27 and 28, for a harlot is a deep pit, and an adulterous woman is a narrow well. Surely she lurks as a robber and increases the faithless among men. So it's a narrow pit is what adultery is described as. You step into it, it's easy to fall into, and once you've fallen in, it's difficult to ever escape the consequences of what you've gotten involved in. It is very seductive, this adulterous woman that lures you in to this immoral lifestyle. It could be an immoral man doing the same thing to a woman. And they act like a robber. They're robbing you of your good name, of your family, of your future. They're taking all of that away just for some momentary gratification. And the desire for this transgression, it's going to cause all kinds of sins to increase among mankind. We have people that don't have respect for God, for His Word, for the vows that they make. And what do we see all around us in society? There's an increase in faithlessness among men, just as is described here in this passage. There's a degeneration in society when people don't respect marriage. It's to throw away the very best years of your life, we're told in chapter 5 and verse 11. And you're grown at your latter end, when your flesh and your body are consumed. Something that is commonly associated with being involved with immoral people and adulterers and adulteresses is they're not only having relations with you, they're usually have had relations with many people. And as a result, there's oftentimes disease that is spread to a person and that eats them up as their life goes on. We know about all of the different venereal diseases and so on that are rampant, that many of them contain, a death sentence in them. And there's mental anguish that accompanies the ruin of your health. It says this person is going to groan with lament at the end of their life when they look back over the foolish choice that they made to get involved in immorality and not lead a pure life. There's going to be the remembrance of all of those foolish mistakes you've made in the past that have led to this latter end of guilt and bad health, and there's no remedy for it. You've wasted your opportunity to live a good, clean, healthy life where you could have walked in God's path and been faithful as you should. So the body and the flesh in the end are consumed by sin. We know there's a picture of life after death in the scriptures that tell us that's going to go on even when this life is over, if we don't repent and get out of it. We're throwing away our last possession when we get involved in adultery. It says in chapter 29 and verse 3, a man who loves wisdom makes his father glad, but he who keeps company with harlots wastes his wealth. It causes you to destroy your inheritance that you gain by a wise behavior of your parents, and you end up in this immoral lifestyle of waste and ruin, and it is a grievous and a bad habit that's going to cost you your money many times. In chapter 6 and verse 29 says, for on account of a harlot one is reduced to a loaf of bread. An adulteress hunts for the precious life. And don't we recognize that the immoral person that doesn't respect the marriage relationship you have with your mate, that would try to seduce you into these illicit affairs, they don't care about your best interest as far as your soul is concerned. They're looking at you as a source of satisfaction for themselves. You're just a loaf of bread to satisfy their desire. Maybe there's a way that maybe they can get part of your money and wealth and take advantage of that. So it says the harlot doesn't care about your finances. She doesn't care about your life or your soul. Now, bear in mind that you're being hunted in this life by immoral people. There's physical dangers and social disgrace associated with adultery, and we're told about it in plain language in the book of Proverbs. The one who commits adultery with a woman is lacking sense. He who would destroy himself does it. Wounds and disgrace he will find, and his reproach will not be blotted out. For jealousy enrages a man, and he will not spare in the day of vengeance. He will not accept any ransom, nor will he be content though you give many gifts. So it shows just what kind of a dangerous world you're stepping into when you get involved in adultery. Adultery is an unwarranted invasion of somebody else's most precious property. And now you've violated that by cheating with somebody else's wife or husband. And you lack understanding if you get involved in such things. This lust is getting in the way of a person's reason, is what the book of Proverbs is telling us. God's commandment, he says that you're guilty enough in the Old Testament to be punished with the death sentence. They realized it was capital punishment for adultery when it was God running the government, right? That was what the law was. And it shows how serious this sin of adultery is. It's downplayed. It's made subject of entertainment and so forth in our society. But that's not the way God views it. That's when you think about the consequences that come to people, both in this life and the world to come, you understand why God hates it and is so opposed to it. There is, again, you're wounded in many ways. You have an enraged husband or wife. There are many of these programs that you see on 2020 or the ID channel. How many of those stories of murder are about the jilted partner taking revenge because of what has happened? There's people involved in adultery and immorality as a major cause of murder. And it talks about here that adultery is of a unique nature. There's some things that you can do and you can pay a ransom. You can offer somebody some money and it'll smooth it over. It says adultery isn't like that. It's such a fundamental part of a person's life and their view of themselves. If you cheat, then they're not going to accept any money. They might want your life. That's what they might want. They decide they'd rather not even live. They want to kill you because of what you've done. So it tells you that you can get in a situation where you can't buy yourself out of it. How many fights and knifings and murders happen because of immoral behavior? So he says they're not going to spare you. Back in that day, if you were arrested and they were going to decide whether you were going to be stoned or not, the person says, stone them. They're not going to accept any ransom to get you out. You're flirting with death. Again, we're told in 2:18 and 19, for her house, the immoral woman, her house sinks down to death, and her tracks lead to the dead. None who go to her return again, nor do they reach the path of life. So it's a one-way ticket. You're not just taking a little slight detour in life if you get involved in immorality, but it's going to affect maybe the rest of your life. It's a dead end. And the consequences are almost impossible to escape. So let's don't flirt with death. Let's stay with all those positive things that God promises us in marriage. It sears a person to get involved in this. It's described as taking fire into your bosom. Chapter 6 and verses 27 through 29. Can a man take fire in his bosom and his clothes not be burned? Or can a man walk on hot coals and his feet not be scorched? So is the one who goes into his neighbor's wife. Whoever touches her will not go unpunished. We wouldn't think about running around on hot coals or taking fire into our breast, but when you get involved in adultery, you're doing the very same thing, we're told. Well, I think, as I mentioned, rather than in the little bit of time we have left, try to look at the excellent wife and what she does for her family, we'll save that for another lesson. Well, brethren, I hope that we'll all take these things to heart in our relationship and value the good relationship God blesses us with and avoid the dark path that leads to death. And apply these things in your heart to what our relationship is with Jesus Christ. We are to be his faithful wife. We are to be one that is loyal to him. We need to recognize that if we make friendship with the world that opposes him and his standards, that we commit adultery against Christ. And we want to make sure that we are faithful and loyal. This time we want to extend the Lord's invitation to those that are present. If you have a need to respond to the Lord's invitation and in order to be saved, we want to encourage you to believe and to be baptized. And if you need the prayers of the church, they're also extended to you as together we stand and